Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Jug Dealers Podcast, where we discuss all things cannabis and lifestyle related, brought to you by the good people at 5-8, and everything available nowadays at jugdealers.net as well. So Please reach out. We're happy to answer your questions, and we're happy to sell you some gear, anything you see up here. DLI lighting, you reach out, we got you. Today, we have a very special episode.
Big episode, yeah, actually. And I honestly, we're going to see how it kind of flows.
Yeah,
but
it's going to probably end up being a couple.
Yeah, at least a couple. It could be even a little bit of a mini series, but really it's, we're going into entomology, right? So we're going to go in the study of bugs. And it's going to, as we normally like to do, we're going to cast a wide net to begin with, kind of start by defining entomology and working through from there. The reality is we want to define entomology. We want to talk a little bit about taxonomy so we can communicate about these things.
And, a lot of people in our industry or in the cannabis industry don't use the right nomenclature. They're not using the right words.
Which is why I thought it was worth.
This is something we've always both been kind of like, hey, the only way to really get people ahead is to educate. But the first thing we want to talk about, as usual, is everybody's favorite bug right now, thrips, because it's thrip season.
It's thrip season.
So for anybody, little plug, for anybody who's got thrips, we have the product for you. We got our multi-spray. You're going to be using it anywhere from 10 to 30 mils a gallon.
Mm-hmm.
Nice little combination oils, 25B.
Yep.
Alcohol.
Yep. Ready to go for any commercial production, whether it's home use, commercial, doesn't matter because it is 25B exempt. Mixed botanical oils can be coupled with our EcoWorks, which kind of uses the spreader sticker. If you guys want to, and I know we've been getting it out,
and it does work.
And it does work.
People have been coming back on. Hey,
yes, and you guys have also been asking for samples, so are also kind of a throw out in general. If you guys are interested in samples, anything we talk about, anything that you see here, hit us up through the Jug Dealers website. Thank you guys. Had a lot of action through the website. Really appreciate that. Keep coming.
The hits.
Yep, we're getting the hits. So welcome to the entomology. And make sure you spell it right because I didn't, and I was like, that's not the right study.
You're like, there's a Y in there somewhere. I know there's a Y in there.
I did.
Ends up being at the end.
Yeah, not after T, is it supposed? So that's ENTOMOLOGY.
And simply put, it is the study of insects.
Yes.
So that, in a nutshell, it is the study of insects. We're keeping it simple there, kids.
Right. And, just talking about insects, they are a part of the group of animals known as arthropods. Arthropods are animals with exoskeletons, right? That hard little outer structure. Yep. It's a hard outer covering, jointed legs. They have extremely successful group of animals throughout history and evolution. As far as like what's out there in numbers, there's nothing more than insects, that's for sure. More than 1 million different species of insects have actually been described to date, believe it or not. And that means they've actually, been captured, been studied, been described, and whatever else as far as from a science standpoint. They are the most abundant group of animals in the world and live in almost every single habitat. And that's actually including Antarctica, believe it or not, which I thought was pretty damn interesting.
Yeah, I mean, my dad would always say to me as a kid, we're going to blow ourselves up.
But they'll be here.
But the insects will still be here.
The insects will still be here. They have lived on Earth for, according to science, more than 350 million years. And entomology is crucial to our understanding of human disease, agriculture, evolution, ecology, and biodiversity. So there's obviously a lot tied up in there and why it's important. And that's kind of something we wanted to talk about. It's why are insects important,
Dude, 350 million years. Can you imagine how big the prehistoric bugs were? Considering how big, like everything.
Well, and if you think about, like, some of that's actually still, there's remnants of it, right? The arthropods, right? Even like a lobster, that's why I call them sea bugs, that exoskeleton, that hard thing that you got to get through to get that delicious meat. That's, so they're actually relatives.
Is lobster considered an insect?
It's not considered an insect, but it's an arthropod, right?
Yeah. So it's in that family. Well, as we start to break that down.
And we'll get into that, the taxonomy.
Yeah, I was going to say, the taxonomy.
That's where we wanted to talk about that. And to be honest, I didn't actually have that in the episode originally, but even myself, I'm going class order.
And you start going down the rabbit hole.
Oh, which
it becomes important.
It's deep. So
let's talk about why insects are important.
Please do.
They're important for pollination and food production. A lot of people don't realize that. They're important for biological control of more harmful insects, which we will talk about later. They're important for animal feed and recycling and waste clearance. It's always funny because I always have the interesting story about the peonies, and I think you and I have talked about that, where we had a lady who was spraying peonies when I was growing up, and she's like, well, there's ants all over them, and she's like, but they won't flower. And we're like, and we go to them, and we're like, the ants eat the sugar.
Quit knocking the ants off.
Yeah, and then the ants eat the sugar, and that's what makes it so the flower can actually bloom. And there's lots of different, obviously you talk about bees and stuff like that, but there's lots of different insects
and these mechanisms
which have
of
that
how things,
symbiotic relationship.
And last but not least, insect protein is actually something that's big. And as far as as a world food, it's actually consumed pretty heavily around the world. It's delicacies even in certain places.
I had crickets down in Mexico.
Hey man, look,
I don't like the legs. The legs get in your teeth.
Oh, that would be a little bit weird because they have kind of that furry, the hook, right? You get that hook right there in the back of the molar.
No. Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, hey, look, I'm not above eating insects.
Speaking of, it's funny though, the you are what you eat conversation. When we got these crickets down in Puerto Vallarta, they harvested them from sesame fields. So when they cooked them, they tasted like toasted sesames.
Okay, now that's actually kind of cool.
They were great. They were amazing.
That's kind of cool. So let's get a little more specific to that. Why are they important? Well, we just talked about that, but really specifically, why should we study them? Well, let me give you a whole set of reasons here. Over half of the 2 million living species described in the world are insects. We already said that we know that there's over 1 million that have been described. Everything else in all the other animalia world, that's the other million, believe it or not. If you're interested in global or local biodiversity, then insects need to be studied. Can you move that up a little bit to Graham Busy? As mentioned, insects have also been around for 350 million years and have evolved solutions to many physical and chemical problems. Engineers also are increasingly looking to insects for solutions in material science and chemistry. The more understanding we have of insects, the more we can put that understanding to use. So it is something, if you think about even whether it's on flies and little mini, little gyrocopter things, and why, certain things are able to fly certain ways or whatever. It's obviously very interesting, a little above my level, but anyhow, insects are unfortunately vectors of many serious human, animal, and plant diseases across the world. Understanding the biology of the insects is key to understanding the diseases and the way they carry and spread, talking about their life cycle, things like that. Insects are also hugely economically important in agriculture. We talked a little bit about that, not just pollination, but they can also be beneficial as decomposers as well. So even the maggots that'll come in and things like that, the eggs, the larva stages that'll come in with flies, things like that. They can also obviously be detrimental pests and, as mentioned, vectors of plant diseases. So a lot of good, a lot of bad there. They are also excellent models for physiological and population processes. This one I didn't consider at all, right? Mm-hmm. But if you do any type of genealogy studies or any type of, time studies, they're always using flies, right? And that's the example they give. It's a common fruit fly, Drosophila melanogaster, and I may have mispronounced that. I know Drosophila is right. The
Anytime
other part,
it's that italicized,
right.
It's a guess.
Yeah, we're just throwing it out here, folks.
I'm not Italian.
But it's been used as a model species in genetic studies for over 100 years, believe it or not. Has a very short generation time, very small size.
That's the biggest thing with them.
The rollover.
You can just that gestation period.
Exactly.
It's
boom. But we're talking, I think a couple days, something like that. So you're able to look at what would normally be, multiple lifetimes in a very short amount of time. And so there obviously can be very easily reared in the laboratory. After all, it is just a fruit fly. More species of insects have their genome sequenced than any other group of multicellular organisms. I found that incredibly interesting. Insects are an excellent model for studying the molecular basis of life, and that's why, that is. But again, so many of these things you just think, insects, it's just insects. Well, wow.
They all
color me surprised.
They all play their part.
Yes, this is part of, when you really think about systems-based thinking and everything else, it's a huge cog in that wheel. The reality is insects are everywhere. No matter where you live in the world or what language you speak, you will come in contact with insects. And sometimes it's good.
Sometimes it's not the best, Sometimes
there's a few of them out there that I'd love to just see go the way of the dodo bird, But then also what happens when and we've seen in certain even countries like, we've had a lot of our own, kind of petri dishes where we've released certain insects to control other things and watch that stuff happen.
We discussed, I think, the russet mice.
Yeah.
They used it to control switchgrass in the center of the highways up in Oregon.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden now you have this super mite or broad mites and stuff like that.
Yep. And obviously even when you talk about emerald ash borer, which is actually a borer that's out of Asia, you talk about a lot of these, we
talk about the Japanese pine beetle, or is that
Yep.
and you look at that, and for people who live out west here, it's destroyed so many of our forests. And that literally, the story I'd always read and been told was that it came over in Japanese shipping containers in the 60s. They would throw them away in the dumps. When they were done eating the shipping containers, they just moved on to the forest. It's the next thing. And literally, when you go to Grand County, somewhere, some of the parts in western Colorado, you come up over Cayman Pass on the backside towards Steamboat, and you're like miles of just dead trees, in which that then creates fire hazard, all kinds of stuff. So it's definitely...
and that's one of the reasons why you even see, agricultural checks, things like that. That's why they're so strict on the borders. It's less about the fruit itself. It's much more about the diseases.
You go into California, they're stopping you.
Oh, yeah. They're going to have a problem with you just rolling in with your nanners, I'll tell you that. All right, well, let's talk a little bit more about taxonomy. We talked about what entomology is, but let's get specific about how we're actually naming these things. I kind of had to retrain myself.
You got me in high school science class here, high school biology.
Hey, man. Buckle up, everybody. It's a big episode. So what is taxonomy? It's a science of classifying organisms to construct internationally shared classification system with each organism placed into more and more inclusive grouping. So it obviously starts very wide and moves down narrow until it's the actual direct species itself. This is all in a hierarchical system. Carl Linnaeus, if you all remember this, again, speaking of high school biology.
The homie.
Yeah, Mr. Linnaeus.
Bro.
He was the first one to actually propose this, started getting it done. The current taxonomic system has now 8 levels in the hierarchy, from the lowest to highest. They are species, genus, family, order, class, phylum, kingdom, and domain.
Domain was a new one to me. I remember.
Same thing.
Yeah.
Same for me. And obviously, I don't know if, and this actually be kind of a funny one for people to give us, the whatever they had. Mine was, King Philip came over from Germany on Saturday for kingdom, phylum, blah, 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 all the way down, right? I know there's a bunch of different ones out there, and it's always funny for people to say, "Oh, this is how I learned it." Right. I mean, I remember.
What are those acronyms? Is that what that is?
Is acronym the?
I can't believe I'm blanking on it. Because it's a mnemonic device.
Mnemonic device. Gotcha. Thank you. That's why we keep Grambo around here. Thank you, man.
I learned how to do the guitar strings. EADG. Every acid dealer gets busted eventually.
Ooh,
that's the guitar strings.
Okay.
Yeah.
True story.
True story. That is true story. In 5th grade, I remember the order of the planets. I bought a Mercury to go to visit Venus, but how on earth can I afford to go to Mars? Jumping Jupiter, Saturn, Saturn, Uranus said the Neptune is selling Pluto's cars.
All right.
Yeah.
You got to remove Pluto though.
I am still counting that chunk of ice and rocks. I'm still Pluto.
Shout out Kuiper Belt.
Shout out Pluto.
Shout out Pluto. Okay, so even it's funny. I said the same thing. Domain may be the one you aren't familiar with. It is that highest domain. Domain specifically is the highest taxonomic rank in the hierarchical biological classification system. It's above kingdom, as we discussed. There are only 3 domains of life. It's archaea, bacteria, and eukarya. Eukarya being all organisms whose cells have a nucleus and organelles. So it's all the animals, all animalia is on that side. That's us. We are eukarya, and then we are animalia, and beyond. But I wanted to do an example.
Did you see what archaea was? What is that? Were you able to?
So archaea, I want to say, is other, like it's protozoa and things like that. It's different. It's other single-celled organisms, I believe.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And again, we really had to pick parts of like where to go into more stuff and less stuff because there was just, you can go in so many different directions here. And actually, Mr. Grambo, why don't we look up that? He's already on it. So while he's pulling that up, I did want to do a little bit of an example. And I'll be honest, I tried to pull up thrifts. I tried to pull up things that are real.
They wouldn't.
It's the subspecies and subcategory. It is the wildest rabbit hole ever. Okay, what do we got here? Archaea is a domain of single-celled organisms. As I said, the microorganisms lack cell nuclei and are therefore prokaryotic.
Ooh,
okay.
Isn't that exciting?
Archaea were initially classified as bacteria receiving the name archaebacteria, but this term has fallen out of use. Archaeal cells have unique properties. So similar to bacteria, it seems like single-celled, basic, early, that kind of stuff that was here before us. And then basic AF. The kind of stuff that was here before us and will be here after us. All right, so I found a slightly easier example, the housefly, right? So
Drop down just
a little other way. There you go, right there. All right, so the housefly, we're just going to run through. The kingdom is Animalia. That's all animals. The phylum is Arthropoda, which is all arthropods, including the lobsters like we were talking about.
Yep.
Sea bugs, after all. The class Insecta, which we're going to talk about
be
specifically.
Like you figure scorpions and stuff like that too would maybe.
I believe that's in Arachnida, which is under Arthropoda.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. But actually, it's funny you bring that up, Gabe. Again, there's a lot of different ways we can go with this. The order is Diptera, which is flies, assuming true flies. Family is Muscidae, which is the house flies. The genus is Musca. So once we finally get down to it, the actual species is Musca domestica. That is your common housefly. So just to show a little bit of an example, and if anybody, this is actually one that I thought about, except that I took out all the sites. This is one I actually thought about potentially putting out for people. If you do really want any of the information that's coming out of here, I'm more than happy to provide you with some of the notes that we've got for this particular episode, just because there's so many specificities, especially when we get into the end with the biocontrols and stuff and talking about some of the different parasites and things like that. There's a lot of difficult words, to say the least.
Yeah, I usually use the back half. Right. That everybody's familiar with the Latin.
I think this would be a good thing that we can put on the website. If you guys want to share some of these things, how about we create on JugDealers.net a little place that we can house sort of these things.
If that's something you guys would like to, I have no problem. We're not hiding anything. This is
comment. If that's the sort of thing you'd want, comment below, and I'll get on it.
There you go. Thank you, Mr. Grambo. Appreciate that. So obviously, this can get quite complicated when you do start doing suborders, super families, all this kind of stuff. It's like it seems very basic with the whole kingdom, phylum, class, order, but there's little sub classes in every one of those.
Well, and I want people to understand the reason that we're building this framework now is because a lot of times when you're looking at some of the pesticides, when you're looking at some of the different things you're going to use, they're going to classify things as to it is for arthropods. It is for these things. So that's really why it's better to have a little bit of an understanding. I mean, look, we're not going into full scale, science class here, but we are giving you the framework. So that way,
and if you want to go deeper.
Yeah. And I'm always going to encourage someone, you're using these different products, read the labels, but when you read the labels and you see some of these words, hopefully it'll help you understand a little bit.
And what's
better.
Also interesting is once you get some of the basic, you start learning the basic characteristics of, because really the whole thought process of this episode came off of doing the 31 orders of the class Insecta, because that's the stuff that we're really familiar with, and that's where you're breaking down, beetles versus flies versus bees and all these different classes, and those are the classes when you start us noticing them. Oh, I can notice these things. Oh, that's a box elder bug, which happens to be of the order Hemiptera, right? So if you know a couple of these basic things, now no matter what you're looking at, you don't know what the bug actually is, but you do know the order. Well, and that's with a little bit of basic knowledge and understanding. All of us can do that.
Well, and understand as well, a lot of what we're talking about. You'll have people that just say the same way we talk about how there's people who only study corn there are people who only study beetles or houseflies or the fruit flies or whatever, so it gets pretty specific.
This is as good a time as any to shout out Mr. Dr. Whitney Craneshaw, who is the longtime entomologist at Colorado State University in Fort Collins. I did have the pleasure of taking his class. He has done a lot of the writing that you'll see that's on cannabis, it's on hemp. He was one of the first guys that actually started doing scientific papers and identification of some of the cannabis pests that we deal with.
And we do have some cannabis-specific pests.
We absolutely do. So thank you, Dr. Craneshaw, because you definitely gave me a really nice basis to work off of, and truly I did enjoy the class, and I enjoy entomology. One other shout out to my good friend Dan Banks. He's living in Puerto Rico these days. Phenomenal entomologist as well. Really, really bright guy. If anybody out there is having issues, when it comes to commercial level things like that, Dan does do a lot of consulting and whatnot. And really, I mean, for me, the insect world is incredibly interesting. If you can back that up just a little bit there you go, right there. Perfect. So just to kind of cap that off, the kingdom Animalia stems from the Eukarya domain, like we said. For the common housefly, the full name has 8 terms, as we said, and we went through all those, which is nice. Scientists generally refer to an organism only by its genus and species, therefore it'd be Musca domestica, although it has all the other hierarchical things behind it. So, as we mentioned, Musca, which I found kind of funny, Musca domestica.
Well,
some of them seem to make sense.
It made me think, I want to know what the horsefly is, because it's got to be musca and then whatever the Latin is for horse, which I don't know.
Or just, I was thinking
musca equina.
Yeah. I was thinking musca asshola. Okay, because I hate those damn things.
Dude, come to Jersey with me sometime. Those things are the size of my golden retrievers.
Do not like it. Do not like it. All right, you can move that up a little bit there, Grambo. Okay, so now we're moving in a little bit more.
Go a little deeper.
Yeah, and why don't you take the top off of this one, Gabe? So really we're moving into, so now this is talking about the class of Insecta, right? So that's King Philip came, right? So that's just under phylum.
Yep.
So that's the one under, it's right under arthropods, right?
Yep, so
Arthropoda.
It is a class of phylum Arthropoda. Insects are classified distinctly by the body structure, location, number of eyes, which can be very important, location, the number of antennae, and the location where the appendages attach to the body at the thorax.
Which is the thorax, right?
You know, so, and that's one of the things that definitely distinguishes these. Insects have a variety of characteristics that distinguish them from other arthropods. 3 characteristics include that they have 3 body segments, a head, an abdomen, and a thorax, that they are invertebrates, meaning that they do not have a backbone, and that they are winged.
Yeah, so that's very important. I thought that was just an interesting detail, which I didn't realize that was part of the deal. They must be winged. Now, you obviously see it in many different forms, and it's part of the way that it's actually broken up, right? So the head is the sensory containing the mouth for feeding, antenna for chemical detection, and the eyes or eye complex. They can't have multiple sets of eyes, right, as in the case like flies.
I found out not that long ago. I think the flies have something like 8 sets of eyes, but that's why you can never hit a fly because they have so many different eyes. They basically have eyes in the back of their head.
Stole it right out of my mouth. But I was going to say they literally have eyes in the back of their head. Pretty wild. The thorax is the region of the major muscles for movement of the legs and wings. Legs and wings are always connected to the thorax in all insects. So that's something that carries across all 31 orders of Insecta. The abdomen functions in reproduction, digestion, waste elimination, and breathing. So it's those sphericals or whatever, right? So it's little breathing holes. Part of the way you can actually kill insects is plugging up those holes. Now they can't breathe. So they don't have traditional lungs like we do, nor do they have a traditional digestive tract. They don't have a large and small intestine. It's basically a straight pipe from the beginning to the end, which is why you actually call it's either honeydew, which you actually see more in like aphids and things like that, or frass, which is like kind of a smaller little black, it's not really, it's insect poop, but it's not poop like, in the way that we know.
That's like one of my favorite things about the Botanigard, the Bovaria bassiana GHA. I mean, basically, it gets inside them and then it blows them out from their intestines. So you can always, when you're treating aphids with them, you always see them kind of crawling around on the floor with their back ends blown out because they can't eat.
So exactly. So word of the wise, plug those spiracles and blow them out. Grandma, can you can you open that graphic that's right there, just kind of showing your the old grasshopper right there. Yes. So you can kind of, see the head, the thorax, the abdomen, all that should make sense. You can see those little spiracles that are down its belly right there. The blasted and feared and disgusting grasshopper. I used to think they all chewed tobacco. See, growing up, my grandpa, he dipped tobacco. I grew up in the Midwest. There's a lot of tobacco users. And, you always saw like they just looked like tobacco juice to me. I always thought they were chewing tobacco. Don't ask me why. Maybe they just come out of a tobacco field. I don't know. I don't know. Move that up just a little bit there, Grambo. Oh yeah, you're wrong. You were right. Sorry.
So the class Insecta is unique because of the organism's exoskeletons, the number of legs, the body segments, again, head, thorax, and abdomen. They are also the only invertebrates capable of flight. So that's really what kind of separates them.
The only invertebrates that are capable of flight. That's very interesting. Now, I wonder where that would, what kind of things were invertebrates flying around, like you were saying long ago.
Oh, dude,
so you can see just how complex this is, guys. It's pretty wild. I don't even mean for that to be readable because it's literally like, holy shit. I just wanted people to see the complexity of it. And again, casting that wide net and then going in from right there. Thought it was just a pretty cool graphic. Same thing. If you guys do want any of these graphics, we can get them to you. Like I said, if you're into it, we'll post it. You guys can check all this stuff out. So characteristics of the class Insecta include So again, they're invertebrates, no backbone, 3 body segments, jointed legs, hexapoda, meaning they have 6 legs. So that's very important, right? So that's Insecta versus Arachnida, which I will go into. And that's the one thing I wanted to mention for that. 10 is on the head, 2 compound eyes, and then the 0 to 3 simple eyes. So they do have compound and simple ones. The ocelli, I wasn't actually familiar with that. And so you can kind of see that whole setup as well. Slightly different. I just wanted to show two different diagrams.
Is that Skeeter?
It looks like it almost looks like a water bug.
Okay.
I don't know.
It might be a Skeeter.
You know what? I would buy a Skeeter. Well, hold on. It's got that long. I'm thinking it might be Skeeter.
It does look Skeeter.
Funnily
enough, it's labeled
Skeeter.
all
Looks
of it.
like, I'll be honest with you. It's about the size of one of the Skeeters they had up in Yellowstone.
Oh man, they'll get you.
I love all of its physiology is labeled, but it's not named.
Yes. Well, hey, we can all just
Skeeter.
have an imagination, I guess. But I wanted to show 2 different graphics, showing 2 different insects that we all are pretty familiar with, and just kind of showing those different portions of 3 segments, etc. So as far as the orders of Insecta, so we've gone the class Insecta, now we're on to orders. There's 31 different known orders, and you do have to say things like known because, could be 31
There's
today.
something in the Amazon.
32 tomorrow. We don't know. And you can easily find a chart with all of them, which I did not want to do, but I did want to bring up this chart right here, which shows you the big 8. Right, and those are going to be the ones that are most important to us from a horticultural standpoint, et cetera. There's 31. I didn't feel like it was worth going through every single one. I thought that was excessive.
That is a mini series right there.
Yeah, that is a full mini series. But again, you guys can get on this, and it talks a little bit about their metamorphosis, wing style, things like that. But the 5 most common insect orders are Coleoptera, Lepidoptera, Hymenoptera, Diptera, and Hemiptera. Don't worry, I'm going to tell you exactly what all these are. The Coleoptera contains the most species of insects, while the Hemiptera order contains the true bugs. The largest numbers of described species in the U.S. fall into 4 distinct orders. Coleoptera, which are the beetles. Diptera, which are the flies. 23,000 Diptera, 19,600 flies. 19,600 different flies. I hate flies.
Friggin' hate.
I hate flies. Way cooler, 17,500 ants, bees, and wasps. Well, bees, actually. The ants and wasps.
The ants,
Ants
they're
are cool.
helpful. They're helpful.
They're very, all these do their thing, right?
Wasps,
Lepidoptera.
I do not like wasps.
I'm not a wasp fan. And then Lepidoptera, which are moths and butterflies, there's 11,500 of those. So as far as horticulturally significant, so just like we like to talk about what's horticulturally significant in a plant that we're growing, right? Are we growing the fruit? Are we harvesting the leaf? Are we oil farmers? Wink, wink. What are we doing here, right? So in the same sense, we want to know what's of horticulturally significant orders of insects as well, because not all of them really matter for what we're doing, right? So there's 31 of them, but only 11 actually contain orders that are economically important pests of trees, shrubs, garden plants, lawns, vegetable crops, wood fiber, and I'm going to go ahead and throw in cannabis. Most of the insect damage caused to garden plants, plaguing garden maintenance people, and garden designers are concentrated in just 7. So even more so, it's 11 that you find it at all. 7's really more where it comes down. So the major pest orders start with the bastards.
Thysanoptera.
Thysanoptera. Thrips.
Yeah.
Thrips. And again, shameless plug for the multi, which we'll talk a little bit more specifically here in a bit, but that is specific for thrips. Thrips have just gotten out of control, and of course we'll even make a small mention about spinosad or the lack thereof.
Yeah.
And so
it blows my mind because the one that we've used, most of us have used for years, is that Monterey spray, in which that's OMRI. So it was always one of those things, and I guess there may be something about it being systemic, but the reality is, it shouldn't last that long.
It shouldn't, because it is. So spinosad is a natural occurring soil bacteria. Is actually where it is and what it's from, and it was used historically in horticulture for a long time for thrips specifically. Now you got the super thrips, so now it's not really working.
Yeah.
It used to be only not allowed in California, but to my knowledge, now
I don't see it anywhere.
Anywhere.
And not for nothing. It's just, now like you had just said, we've evolved past that. The thrip has evolved past that, in which now it's much more of a super thrip. On top of the fact, I think just in cannabis, there was poor management on people's behalf, into which they just relied on that spinosad.
Sure, yeah.
And you can't, like I say to people all the time, you got to have, at least 2 and preferably 3 modes of action where you're using different things. And again, that goes back to why we're kind of educating in the first place, because, you've got to understand the modes of action. They need to be different.
Yeah, they need to be different. You need to be attacking different parts of the life cycle, which we're going to talk about here in a little bit as well. But you're absolutely correct. You need more than one arrow in the quiver. You can't just expect one arrow to always take it out.
We used to use petroleum-based pesticides, and I'll tell you right now, you hit spider mites with the same thing 3 times in a row, those suckers are like scrubbing behind their ears with that stuff. They're like, hey, man, they're like, you missed the spot, bro. You know?
Well, and I mean, so as we go through the major pest orders, and this is really, honestly, guys, in my mind, this is where a lot of the meat and potatoes comes into this episode. This is where we start talking about more specific, what these things are doing, how to control them, et cetera. These, and keep in mind, this is not just, this is not specific to cannabis. The things I'm going to talk about as far as
the thrip that most of us see is the Western onion thrip.
Right.
So it's just, people just, and that's one of the reasons for me when I'm building out these facilities, I put in air showers, I make people wear scrubs, I make people do all these things. Because you could have a guy at home that doesn't grow cannabis. Maybe he's got a great vegetable garden or whatever, but he could easily bring those pests into the garden and transfer them around. So that's one of the reasons we're so stringent about these things, because where I lived in Maryland, huge agricultural area. Agricultural area.
I see that in Florida a lot too, right? These old areas that have been growing strawberries or all these other things, and they try to grow cannabis in there,
these places,
and the bugs around them are bulletproof.
And a lot of the facilities that we see down in Florida are old food production facilities and stuff like that.
Yep.
So, and the thing you need to understand,
flour, food, all kinds of stuff.
When it comes down to something like a spider mite, that's an egg that hatches from an egg, in which you don't need to see them. There could just be some eggs dormant around. And really, the best way to kill them that a lot of people, it's hard to achieve is you got to get that room up to 120, 130 degrees for a little bit of time, in which that's hard for people. It's really hard for people with LEDs. So, I mean, at least when you had HPSs, you could pull the sensors, turn on the HPSs and get them. And I hadn't really done it, but I used to know a lot of guys who would bake their rooms after because they were like, hey, this is going to kill those eggs. So, you got to understand what you're dealing with, and realistically, they're so small, all you need is one.
And that's why I started with, kind of the wide net with etymology and what it is, and really getting into the order so you can understand what you're dealing with. You can start understanding the life cycle. You can understand what metamorphosis it is. And then you're attacking specific pieces of the life cycle, which basically we're going to finalize the whole thing here with real specifically control of okay, we got all this shit, now what? Know? But until then, I was very surprised to see thrips as the number one as far as a major pest order, thrips being number one. Dicynoptera. Okay, that's the actual order of insecta. Most thrip species are plant feeders. Some thrips are leaf and some are flower pests. They are minute. They're 1 millimeter wide and 3 to 4 millimeters long. They're little torpedoes. Okay?
Yeah, they're fast little fuckers.
Little torpedoes.
If you're dealing with them in cannabis, they like to move down the veins of the leaves.
Yep.
So you're always, and they're leaf miners, so they're going to be on the top. But you're always going to look for those things cruising down the veins.
Yep.
That's really.
And here's
where
the
you're
other thing: if you
see
can, especially like which is going to be tough to do. One, they're moving so fast; it's hard to even get them on a loop.
Yeah, they're boogie town.
That's why when we talk about control, even things as basic as sticky traps, because sticky traps are as much for identification as anything. Just to be real clear, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. But if you're getting on there, the thing is, it has those frilly wings. That's one thing you really can look at, right? So if present, the wings, which they don't have to be, depending on whether they're adults or not, right? So they're winged when they're adults. They're not winged when they're not. When they are adults, you'll actually see their feathered, frilly little wings. They're kind of weird looking. Mouth parts are the rasping, sucking type. When thrips populations are large, and by the way, that's why you see those little lines, those little white lines.
Yep.
They're scraping, they're killing the
leaf,
cells.
Leaf miners.
And they can be horrible vectors of disease as well. When thrips population are large, plants can be damaged severely because larvae and adults feed on the same host plant at the same time. So whereas in other insects, it's like the adults are doing one thing and then the larvae and whatever is doing another thing. These are attacking the same parts in both stages. That's one of the reasons why they're so destructive and why they end up as being the number one major plant pest order.
We did say mouth parts, by the way. I know that got you excited.
You guys, you know me too well.
Yeah, you dog. All right, why don't you talk a little bit about Homoptera?
So the Homoptera is aphid scales. Adelgids, but I don't.
Adelgids, those are rare.
I don't think I've seen those in cannabis. Mealybugs, psyllids,
yes,
whiteflies, leafhoppers, and cicadas. I don't know that I've ever seen a cicada in a cannabis garden.
And again, keep in mind, this is not cannabis specific, guys.
100%.
This is all agriculture.
All Homoptera insects are plant feeders and are plant pests most often encountered by gardeners. Aphid scales, mealybugs, adelgids, psyllids, and whiteflies are the most recognizable pests infesting plants in this group. Their mouth parts, as Grambo loves, are piercing and sucking and originating from
as opposed to rasping, piercing,
from the back
right?
of the head. However, some feed on plant leaves, while other, like nymph stage cicadas and some species of aphids, feed on the roots. And you will definitely
root aphids.
Yeah, the root aphids are pretty nasty. The biggest thing that that really can be tough, and even when you're using the Beauveria bassiana, it's got to make contact. It's got to, and that's the tough part, because ultimately you really need a drench with that. That's not something you're going to want. You're going to want to come in and really soak those things in.
Well, and we're talking top to bottom, left to right.
It's expensive. I'm not going to lie. It's an expensive way to deal with it, but a lot of times it's one of the only ways
why don't you explain that? Is it expensive from the product itself or the labor as well?
Yeah, and just the amount that you need to use. I want to say,
and somebody's got to put it on there.
I want to say, I can't. It's been a while, but I want to say like a 1 pound container, costs like $100.
I remember being expensive,
and it's just, another way to help deal with them that we had talked with in the past, and this is actually especially nice if you're dealing with some of these containers that you can throw away, like our kind of our bags, our inflatable bags,
right?
But Tanglefoot,
yeah.
It's a pain in the ass, but the reality is, they can't move once they get in there.
Good old Tanglefoot. Boy,
it was funny when you sent me the notes for this part of the episode. I started thinking about things, and I'm like, man, it makes me think of Tanglefoot.
Shout out
I would promote people. Definitely do use the yellow and the blue sticky traps. Use them in your garden. I've seen a lot of gardens where people use them pretty extensively. If you don't know how to use those, they have the squares on them, so you can literally take them. Count the amount of bugs that are in the square. That'll help you.
That's why they're there.
Yeah, that'll help.
There it is, the tree Tanglefoot.
That'll help you kind of kind of monitor your pressure, which will help you kind of make decisions and stuff like that. But they are good to have around.
Yeah, no, they are. But again, they're as much for looking at the density, pressure density, and then also identifying what you're dealing with, because these little boogers are moving around pretty darn fast, right? Yep. So let's talk a little bit about Hemiptera. So Hemiptera are the true bugs. So anything, if like box elder bugs, things like that, anything that has like kind of a diamond or a triangle look on its back, which you see them a lot. Go to even a sunflower seed, tap out a bunch, you'll see, and it's like, oh, that's got kind of a little diamond. Anything that looks like that is Hemiptera. So even something like a ladybug, shocker, guys, ladybug is actually a lady beetle. It's Coleoptera. I'm sorry. I don't want to beat up anybody's day here. Well, we actually have a special shout out to the lovely lady beetle later in the show. Okay, insects in this order of Hemiptera, the true bugs, are called the true bugs because they have 4 wings held flat over their body at rest. The front wings have a basal portion that is thick and leathery, and an apical tip portion that is membranous. The hind wings are entirely membranous. Some species are wingless. The mouth parts are piercing, sucking type, segmented, and attached at the front of the head. And I don't. So when I read that earlier, and I was like, wingless, but I thought they all have wings. My guess is in certain stages, right? So a lot of times you do see, because larvas, that's really the eating stage typically, and then the adult stage is the reproductive stage. So you usually see a lot less feeding. So even with ladybugs,
they're totally different as young ones. If you didn't know, you would think it was bad. Yeah, you wouldn't know it was a ladybug.
And I'll have Grambo pick up pull the picture when we get to it later, because it looks like a little. They're cool as hell, but they
feed different as well. Yeah. Like the
what they feed on and their rate of feeding.
Yeah,
10 to 1, the larvae are eating what the adults eat. The adults don't care about eating. They've gotten to that stage. They're looking to reproduce and die.
I'm gonna be. It's funny. Another, I think about the full size ones, and it would always piss me off because they'd be in there, and you'd look at them, you'd want to see them feeding, and they'll walk like right by a spider mite or an aphid.
Oh, they don't care.
And you're yelling. You're like, it's right there. Eat it.
They don't care. They don't care. They don't care.
But they're like, I'm on a different agenda. I'm on a different.
What it looks
like? That is exactly what it looks like.
Stay tuned.
Yeah,
this is I'm learning something as we're going.
Yeah. So little sneak peek.
I'll never forget. I hadn't,
But yes, that's him.
I was at Grassroots, and I had released full size ladybugs. A couple weeks later, I saw one of these, and I'm like, "What the
What
fuck
is this little
that?" I was
dinosaur?
like, "Oh God, I gotta."
No,
I didn't even have pests in the building, so I was just like, "What the fuck?" And I go and I look, and I'm like, "Oh, look at that! It's a baby ladybug." I was
they're
like,
awesome.
"Who knew?"
They're
I
awesome.
was like,
They're
"You would
awesome.
have figured they look different."
Okay, why don't you do Lepidoptera? One of my favorites.
Wait, did we skip Diptera? Or?
Oh, did we skip the? No, sorry, we did. Sorry.
Yeah,
Actually,
yeah.
do the true flies.
Yeah,
true
so
flies.
Diptera, the true
True
flies. Insects in this order have one pair of wings, whereas other insects have hind wings. Diptera species have knob-like structures called halteres
Yep.
that function as
I
balancing
believe it's
organs.
halteres, but yep.
Halteres. Halteres allow flies to maneuver very quickly in flight, making them almost impossible to catch. This is true. This is true.
This is
Adult
true.
mouth parts vary by the species and can either be sucking, sponging, piercing, lapping.
Or lapping.
You know,
I mean-
that sounds great. You know, mouth parts of larvae are hook-like or chewing. Larvae are generally called maggots and are white, legless, and worm-like.
Remember the whole kind of decomposition
It's
thing
so
we were
exciting.
talking about?
Yeah,
But
yeah. Oh, yeah.
that's good old Diptera. Hey, look, it's not the prettiest order, but dang
No.
it, they get
No.
shit done. Okay.
You know, and we're all
Rambo's like,
they do. Yeah, they literally get shit done.
ba-da-ba-ba-ba. Okay, Lepidoptera, maybe my favorite one. I do love me a good butterfly.
You've been to the butterfly pavilion here.
I
haven't
have.
you?
I have.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it
If
is.
you haven't, it's something cool we have here in Colorado. They got a lot of butterflies.
I got a lot of
And
butterflies.
moths. They got the Atlas moth.
I didn't know that. Maybe I'll take my little girl there.
Oh yeah, your little
No,
girl will
she
love
she,
it.
love
she
it.
loves it. Yeah. All right.
Atlas-
Butterfly Museum.
They
Yeah,
got the
Butterfly
Atlas
Museum it is.
moth. I think the Atlas moth is the biggest moth in existence.
What about like the sparrow moths, right? That literally look like a little bird. You're like, what?
Yeah.
in God's name is that?
Yeah.
I mean, okay, man, that might be a little bit, but they're
You know, the thing is,
Look it up, Crambo. Sparrow moth.
a fly doesn't have beautiful wings. Butterfly does.
that's true.
You know,
That's true. That's true. Yeah,
the Miller-
look at that sucker.
the Miller moths. I can
You
do
saw
without.
that in the woods, like catching a reflection.
Dude,
what on
they're
earth
huge.
is those eyes?
Miller moths are just annoying as hell.
Oh God,
They
I
mean,
your
we didn't
sweaters.
get a bad year this year though.
No.
We didn't get a bad year. The cicadas, the Midwest got beat up with the double cicada, the double whammy.
Yeah.
I miss them. Being a Midwest guy, do you miss it every now
I do.
and then?
You know,
when I
like,
hear them,
I'm excited. I gotta admit, I'm excited to go back east to get some cicadas and some fireflies.
Dude, sitting out back at Jeans, it's raucous. It's loud.
It's loud out
It's
there.
like it's loud. It's awesome. Okay, all right. Well, let's talk a little bit about Lepidoptera. That is butterflies and moths. This is the order that most insect novices are familiar with. We all love us a good butterfly. The larvae and adults have very different feeding host habits and mouth parts, as we would know from something as basic as the monarch butterfly, for example. We know that it specifically feeds on milkweed. That's those big fat green worms. They spin that little cocoon and come out as beautiful, lovely butterflies.
The chrysalis.
The chrysalis, look at that. Larvae are mostly leaf chewers, and some are leaf miners, gall makers, those damn gall makers, and borers into herbaceous stems, fruits, and wood. The mouth parts of the larva, which are known as caterpillars, are the chewing type. Go figure. Caterpillars can be found feeding on a huge variety of plants, as we all know.
including cannabis.
Including cannabis. On the other hand, the mouth parts of the adults are modified tube-like structures. So it literally goes from a chewing structure to just like a tube, like even on butterflies, I got that like rolled up tube, sucking up plant juices, compounds, essentially nectar. Adult butterflies and moths are another mouth.
makes me think of like a sex doll, bro.
Oh, God.
It's like a round mouth.
Oh, God. Adult butterflies, back on track. Adult butterflies and moths are not the leaf chewers and feeders. They're larvae, the caterpillars are. So now, as we now know that we are, it's a lady beetle, which is Coleoptera, which is the beetles. Why don't you describe to us what that means?
Insects in this order are known as beetles and are very recognizable to the garden. I think we all have a good idea what a beetle looks like.
Mm-hmm.
Adult beetles have 4 wings, but the front wings are called elytra, and serve as protective sheath or coverings as the membranous hind wings. So as you notice, if you look, they have that kind of hard shell for their wings, which are used for flying. Mouth parts are chewing. Many beetles feed on trees, shrubs, herbaceous plants, including turf, grass, roots. Several situations, adults and larvae can be pests. And again, a prime example would be, the pine beetle that we have here. The way those work is they actually work. They go through the veins of the tree.
Emerald ash borer,
and
another
a
great
lot
example.
of times, if you see the symptoms of a pine beetle, it is too late for that tree because it's already been in there quite a while. But when you peel back the bark, you'll notice kind of all these.
And like even ash, like they'll sit in the firewood. You're not even supposed to move firewood county to county, specifically ash.
Yeah, no, you see that.
So I've actually been having a treat for my ash trees, and it's been steadily moving across from the east coast to the west.
It's funny. I was just up in Yellowstone and I got some firewood up there. Didn't burn the second box, and I was actually like, do I bring this home?
Well, burn it soon. Burn it. Oh, that's okay. Well, man, you keep bringing up the lady beetles. They're so lovely. Okay, so that is the beetles. Pretty recognizable. Again, it's that hard outer case. As we know, a lot of them can be pests. They do a variety of different things. You see those really wacky, huge ones in Africa. Those ones are cool, man.
When we were doing the research for this episode, and I was kind of going through my lists of predators and stuff, I went through everything, and I noticed they didn't have the ladybugs, so I just went and pulled it up to kind of, because I was like, look, I use ladybugs, and they're actually discouraging. They're discouraging people buying them because apparently there's kind of a shortage. Like they got so overused for a while that they're like, look, if you need them, get them, but if not, we would prefer not to sell them to you. And I was actually, I generally use Arbico. There's a couple other, there's Copert. There's a couple other ones that are pretty good. But yeah, I was actually surprised at that. They had a whole dissertation on, hey,
they probably just don't have a lot of people that are raising lady beetles out there.
Yeah, and we used to get, I remember when I would order them, we get like 5,000 in a bag, and I don't know if you've ever dealt with that many ladybugs.
Yeah, they just go.
Well, they actually don't as much. Like when you
shake them.
When you open that bag and they're in that Excelsior inside, first off, when you get them out, you got to spray down the bag and let it sit for like a couple hours so they actually get active. But once you actually release them from the bag, you'll have like 1,000 ladybugs like crawling. You're like, oh God, like get these things off me. Come on.
Yeah. And don't worry, we have a whole section on our lovely lady beetles. Last one is Hymenoptera, which is bees, ants, wasps, sawflies, and parasitic wasps. Now, I found this one to be interesting because I'm going, well, geez, bees, ants, wasps. I'm going, I don't see a lot of pests there. Well, it's actually the sawflies, it turns out, is really what it is. But this order does include, and a nod to it, many beneficial
these
insects.
are beneficials.
Mostly. But believe it or not, some are bad enough that it still ends up on the worst list. So insects in this order generally have 4 membranous wings, and hind wings are smaller than the front wings. However, some species are wingless. The mouth parts are mandibulate, which means they're chewing, yet some species have modified mouth parts for liquid uptake, such as bees. Major plant pests in the Hymenoptera are the sawflies. So it's actually the sawflies that are the real agricultural pests. I was not familiar with that. I did not decide to go into a whole lot of info on that because, again, you can take a left, you can take a right. If you guys want to look up shit on sawflies, have at it. Now, I was very surprised when we talked about this at the beginning of the episode, and even the fact that I had a grasshopper diagram earlier. Grasshoppers weren't on there. So all these other things, now granted, we're talking indoor and outdoor pests, right? Also, all parts of horticulture. So floriculture, indoor flowers, everything, right? So
I've never heard of my friends and like Colta and like we think about our buddy up in Massachusetts. Right. I've never heard many people complaining about grasshoppers being...
No, but they could. But at the same time, a bad grasshopper, they can decimate a whole.
Well,
a whole
and that being said,
field.
I was telling you the story before the episode where I had a cultivation here in Denver. We had a grasshopper get into my clone room, and that little fucker caused some damage, bro.
Well, that's the thing. Here, I guess that's more what it is, right? Is they can. Now, here's something that's interesting, right? So here in Colorado, we get affected by how cold the winters are, so how far the insects get knocked back. I didn't go into this, I didn't put it in here, but we'll talk about it real quickly. It's called the Puccina pathway. And what it is essentially, a pathway from the south to north of where insects come up, right? And so as it warms through the season, they make it from south to north. If you're farther enough south, they overwinter in the south, right? So they never go away. Now, if we have a very light winter, we'll see grasshoppers much earlier because they didn't get knocked as far south. So it's literally they have to travel that distance all the way back. So the harsher the winter, the more they get knocked back, the more or the less problems we here in Colorado have with insects. But yeah, it's basically this passageway and air path, but it's also they're basically hopscotching from ag field to ag field. So it essentially runs right up the Midwest because that's where the food source is. Yeah. So now the other thing, I I can almost feel the comments coming here. Where's spider mites and russet mites? Well, they're in the class Arachnida, not Insecta. So although they are a horticultural pest, we are talking about.
And on the next episode, when we kind of break all this down,
and we're going to go ahead and give them a nod. They're going to, because when we talk about the cannabis specific pests, I would be incredibly remiss to leave those out, right? So, speaking of that, why don't we talk about cannabis specific pests and take a break?
I was going to say, new intro.
Well, yeah, let's just take a break. Let's smoke real quick and
do a send out.
Yeah.
Because people have commented a couple times that it's a kind of abrupt, that it just fades out.
So that's going to bring us to a close on the first part of this episode. Hopefully you've gotten something educational out of it. I'm going to be honest with you. I sure did, and honestly, likewise. That was one of the biggest reasons, we really started this whole project, was so that not only can you learn something, but we can kind of learn.
We get to learn right along with you,
or even get to refresh ourselves on the next episode that you'll see when we talk about pests. A lot of it I'm familiar with, but God, I needed a refresher.
Dude, there was a lot of refreshers in there. There was a lot of refreshers. So you'll be seeing cannabis-specific pests. We'll be talking a little bit about IPM. We'll be talking even more specifically about control and biocontrol to really kind of wrap up this whole deal. So again, we start wide, we end up narrow, trying to really give you guys some information you can walk away with in your gardens. See you soon.
Stay safe.
Cheers.
Love you. Peace.